Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Craig Perra from themindfulhabit.com, and you are listening to Sex Afflictions and Porn Addictions, a podcast designed to help you create healthy sexuality in your life and live a great life. Those two things are inexorably intertwined, and I have a very special guest with me today. I'm really excited about it, guys. Dr. John Schinnerer, my guest today, coaches men to perform at their peak from the boardroom to the bedroom. Dr. John hosts a podcast to help men evolve, the evolved caveman. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. I love that title. He graduated from UC Berkeley with a PhD in educational psychology, was an expert consultant for Pixar's Inside Out, which I absolutely love that movie, and I love the parts work that's described in that movie. Very important skill set for you guys. We're going to talk about that in another podcast. He's spoken to organizations such as Stanford Medical School, UC Berkeley, Kaiser Permanente, Sutter Health, Gap, and UPS. He's been featured in national media such as U.S. News and World Report, Reader's Digest, Self Magazine. He's worked with Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, entrepreneurs, and executives from dozens of Fortune 500 companies. And he wrote the award-winning book, How Can I Be Happy? His areas of expertise range from high performance to stress management to positive psychology, a fascinating field, guys. You should Google that term. You'll learn a lot, to anger management, to creating happy, thriving relationships. Hey, John, thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Greg, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's so great. I love doing what I do and talk to other like-minded men, helping other men. So let's start with this. Tell me about the evolved caveman. I absolutely love that title. What's the significance of that title to you, John?
Okay, so let me back up a little bit. So when I opened up private practice back, 15, 16 years ago, I started with a positive psychology push, which is basically, the scientific pursuit of happiness. And
so, John, quick, but so you were well ahead of the curve. I mean, this positive psychology has been, I've been seeing it a lot over the course of the past 2 years. So you were in early. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. In fact, I had a blog that was top 3 in positive psychology on the internet for a while, and then I had technical difficulties and I lost it somehow. I just had too many websites. But anyway, so started with positive psychology. I think I was a little bit too far ahead of the wave there. And so the response was lukewarm, because I figured out later that people don't come in to pursue pleasure or happiness. They usually come in to avoid pain or get out of pain. Pain is stronger than pleasure. And so because of things that were going on in my marriage at the time, and because of a tip from a psychiatrist friend of mine, I started getting into anger management. And that took off. So I started working with men, in particular with adolescents and adults, around the issues of anger, which that led to, I got a little bit drained after 10 years of working with angry adolescents. And so I started shifting more into adult males, and that led to working with executives. So then I was working with executives that were worth a lot of money. And I realized that they were really successful at work, and they were respected. They knew what was coming. They knew their role, they knew their place. Then they would go home, and it was exactly the opposite. They didn't know what was expected of them. Their wife was annoyed with them. They didn't know how to converse with their teenage children. And so I started getting into relationship work, just learning tools to teach to these clients to get beyond that caveman status. How do we get better in relationship? How do we get more emotionally aware? How do we get to a place where we can be happy and thriving in our relationship? Because to me, if we're not happy in our relationship, then we're not truly happy.
And the data is overwhelming, isn't it? I mean, good sex equals great life. Good relationships equal great life. The data is pretty overwhelming on that point. Isn't that right, John?
I think, yeah, absolutely. And I think that part of the problem that we men have is we're sold this bill of goods, which is, get good grades, achieve, play sports, get into the best college you can, get the best job you can, get married, create wealth, and then you'll be happy. And that's only part of the picture. And I can't tell you how many executives that have come in and are worth, 50, 100, $200 million. And they're like, John, I'm miserable. And they've done everything right. And if they've done everything right and they're miserable at the end of the game or towards the end of the game, then where have we gone wrong? And so to me, it's about, you know, relationship, it's about connection, it's about authenticity, it's about emotional awareness, it's about developing skills to become happier or to put the conditions of positive emotions more into your life more frequently so that you can enjoy life, not just endure life.
I love it. I love it. And I want to focus on anger today, John, because I know that's one of your areas of expertise. Just start with a broad question. What role do you see anger playing in men's lives?
Whew. Okay, so it depends how far you want to go back, but if we, you know, look into this masculinity piece, the way that we're socialized as men or as boys is, if, you know, when I have a new client come in, I'll say, look, I can eliminate 2/3 of the emotional spectrum for you with 2 phrases. So go back to elementary school, middle school. If you show too much sadness or fear, somebody will say something like, stop being a pussy, don't be a little bitch, don't be a girl. And, you know, it could be your dad, could be a coach, might be a teacher, but definitely will be your peers or one of your peers. It could even be a female friend. And then if you show too much excitement, joy, love, romanticism, vulnerability, you'll get something like, don't be such a fag, don't be gay, you know. And if you're somewhat smart and somewhat sensitive, you learn really quickly that hurts, like that's embarrassing, I'm not going there anymore. And you shut down a whole host of emotions. And so what are you left with? You're left with some degree of anger, irritability, frustration, rage, annoyance, or you've got lust, or you've got stress. Those are the 3 things that we can, as men, cop to or admit to without risk. We feel, learning how to label how we feel, it cuts us off from becoming better at communication, and it cuts us off from being better in relationship. And so fast forward 20, 30 years, you're an adult, you're in a relationship. I mean, 75% of the divorces in the US are initiated by women. And one of the biggest complaints I hear from them is, I can't connect with my husband. And that's, you know, there's no emotional awareness, there's little communication skills, there's little empathy, there's little sympathy. And that's a problem.
So you know, as you're talking, John, I'm realizing, or it just, you know, reminded me that the emotions that we need to, as men, to succeed in a long-term committed relationship are blocked from us at this early age. And so why is it anger is so impactful? What is it doing for these guys?
Well, and so there's one other thing I forgot to say that I want to be sure that I say. It's that to anyone that's listening out there, to any of the guys listening, please realize this is not your fault. It is your responsibility to find tools to deal with it. So there's no blame here. We're all socialized in the same way, and we all kind of start in the same manner. We just have to find ways to overcome it. So in terms of your question, Craig, about why is it so impactful? I mean, anger fascinates the hell out of me, and partly because and I've seen this in myself, when I get really angry, if I'm angry at you, nothing is my fault. It's all your fault. And that's a really comforting position to be in. It means if I'm really angry, if I'm hostile, if I've got that, like a chronic trait of hostility where I'm angry or irritable most of the time, it basically shuts me down from learning anything new, because nothing's my fault. I don't need to change anything. And I think that's the really addictive piece to anger, that it's easy to externalize blame, to make everything someone else's fault. If you would just stop doing this, if you would stop being such a bitch, if you would stop looking at me this way, if you would stop being such a prude, if you would stop acting like my mother, I wouldn't feel this way. I wouldn't have to yell at you. That's the general dynamic.
So to shift this just a little bit sexually, John, how should a man reconcile that anger, which is so destructive yet so masculine, with a man, for example, who has a sexually dominant side. You know, you look in porn today, clearly violent themes are, you know, throughout, you know, every or almost every major video on the free tube sites. There's dominance, there's aggression, there's sexual abuse, there's physical abuse. And I find a lot of guys have trouble, you know, showing up authentically around that part of themselves because it's so warped and twisted for a variety of different reasons. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I've got a bunch of thoughts on it. It's hard to narrow it down into a linear conversation. So one of the things that crosses my mind is, yeah, I think a lot of the porn out there, again, it kind of comes back to the way that we're socialized, is we're supposed to be dominant. We're supposed to be sexually dominant. We're supposed to be aggressive. We're supposed to be invulnerable. We're not supposed to have needs. We're not supposed to, you know, show how we feel. It's interesting to me. I like the idea that there's kind of at least three layers or levels of making love. So there's making love, which is sort of more gentle and tender and romantic, let's say. There's screwing, which is kind of in the middle. And then there's fucking, which is more aggressive, dominant, and angry. And I was thinking about this question, and it makes me think that because I'm not opposed to angry sex. I think there's a place for that. I think there's a time for that. I think it's a turn on. I think women like it. But to me, as I was thinking about it, it has to be in a relationship in which there's trust and communication. Like I was thinking about one night stands, right? And I don't really think there's a place for angry sex in one night stands because there's no trust built up. You don't have any history of communication. And I can see where, you know, if any one night stand necessarily has a higher level of excitement and arousal to it. And so if you throw anger on top of that, I think it's going to be that much harder to stop what you're doing if someone says no. And so to me, I think that you have to have that foundation of trust and connection and communication so that you can talk about it. What do you like? What do you not like? Is this okay? Is this too hard? Is this too rough? How was that for you? You know, those kind of questions, I think, enable you to have angry sex in a safe manner, in a productive manner, in a manner that you both enjoy and that turns you on.
Do you feel that the increase in violence in porn, you know, when you go back to the 70s, you know, 80s, I remember when I was a kid and I finally, you know, got that holy grail of watching a movie, you know, on VHS, or going to the theater, the place where men go to die, the adult bookstore. It wasn't violent. It wasn't aggressive. Do you feel that that increase in violence and aggression is somehow connected to the lack of agency and control and the lack of power that so many men, even successful men, feel in their lives? Is there a connection with that increase to how we're feeling about ourselves?
Well, I think that one of the most powerful and most common emotions out there is shame. And, you know, shame is that fear of disconnection if someone knows something deep and hurtful about me, something embarrassing about me. And I think men in particular are very prone to shame. And so I think to your question, we can watch porn and you see this angry, dominant, aggressive, violent porn. And I think for some men, they think maybe that's what I should be doing, or that's what I'm not doing. How come I'm not doing that? So our minds often work by comparison. And so we make these comparisons like, oh my God, like perhaps that's what I'm supposed to be. That's the sex I'm supposed to be having to turn her on. And then you try it out and you could get yourself in some big trouble if that's a one night stand. So yeah, I think it does impact who we are. I think it does impact the sex that we have. I think it partly depends on where you are in the lifespan though. I mean, if you're, you know, our age, and depending on where you first got into porn and how much you watch it, I don't think it's going to have a huge impact. I'm a little bit more worried about the young men who have come up from the age of 10 on with internet porn. And that's become their primary source of education around sex. Because I think that's going to have a bigger impact.
It's scary. John. I talk to, about once a week, I'll get a call from, and you can tell right away, a 10, 11, 12-year-old boy who had the intelligence to, find himself down this path, but also realize that he needs help, and then, is reaching out, but they have no one to talk to about it. As soon as I ask about speaking to their parents and telling them I can help them, I can't help a kid without their parents' permission, and I'll point them to a few resources. But as soon as, I mentioned speaking to their parents, click, they hang up, and these kids are banged up, and I can't imagine when they start dating, when they start connecting, when they start exploring, that their only imprint is violent, aggressive sex, and it really feels problematic to me.
Yeah, and I've talked to a lot of kids about porn and adolescence, where we've gone back and maybe they're in high school, and then we'll get into porn, and I'll say, when did you start? And some will say 10, 11, 12, 13. The problem with that is that you start off with pretty typical porn, and then there's this progression of increasingly aggressive, darker, more violent, more extreme porn. And then they get to this point where that's what they need in order to get aroused and in order to have an ejaculation. And we've talked about this before, that there's a huge problem with erectile dysfunction, ED, with the 20-somethings, because they've watched porn for so long and so frequently that reality just doesn't live up to what they've seen on the internet.
Yeah, that literally my day in and day out, talking to those guys. So what is for the men struggling with anger, John, what do they do? Without revealing your secrets and how you help people, but someone struggling with anger, what are some of your recommendations as the first things that they can do to understand this part of themselves better and ultimately get control of it and be able to channel it in a healthy way? Where should that person start?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And I have no problem sharing secrets or whatever, because my thought is that anything I can share will make the world a less angry and thus better place. But I think the first place to consider is awareness. And, if you've got a loved one telling you that you've got an anger issue, I strongly suggest heeding that warning. Listen to them, because you may or may not be as angry as they're saying, but there's still something there. If someone says to you, you've got an anger problem and you need to look at it, please take a look at it. It can't hurt. Whether or not that relationship stays with you doesn't matter. I think most men need to find tools to turn down the volume on anger. I think that's generally a good way to go. And it doesn't mean that, I've talked to 20-something football players, college football players, and they get really jacked. They get really scared when I start talking to them. When they come in, they're like, I need my anger. And I'm like, yes, you do. The goal here is not to eliminate anger. The goal is to give you the ability to shift gears so that you can use anger appropriately. You can use anger to your advantage. You're not your anger's bitch.
You're saying that was an important point. So it's not about getting rid of it, but being able to own it, direct it, channel it, use it as fuel when necessary. Is that what you're essentially saying?
Yeah, and part of it's just being aware of it in the moment and being able to label it. Gee, I'm getting a little bit annoyed here, or I'm getting frustrated, or I'm getting angry. What's going on? Because a lot of times the guys that I talk to, anger comes up so quickly. It's a third of a second between stimulus and response. And it comes up so quickly that a lot of the guys that I've talked to have been like, yeah, I don't know what happened. I started getting angry, and the next thing I knew, there was a guitar on the wall. And I kind of looked around and said, who did that? And they're like, well, you did. So I've talked to people that get so angry, it's almost like they black out in anger. And I think there is a loss of self-awareness a lot of times. But, to continue on the question, I think that, one of the foundational understandings is you need to be aware that there's a difference between the feeling of anger and the behavior that follows. So you can be angry and not hit someone. You can be angry and not yell at someone. You can be angry ideally and just say, hey babe, you know, I'm starting to get a little bit annoyed here. I need you to bring your tone of voice down, or I need you to speak to me with respect, or I'm kind of tired. I'm going to go hang out by myself. Whatever the need is, the anger is trying to tell you that you have a need that's not being met or a boundary that's being violated. And so the better you can get at recognizing that in the moment and speaking up to that, that's going to help out a lot. The other part of it is, one of the first lessons I'll teach clients is to look at anger on 3 dimensions. So there's duration, there's intensity, and frequency. And I remember that by what's the diff, D-I-F, duration, intensity, frequency. So duration is, how long does it last? When you get angry, is it lasting minutes? Is it lasting hours, days, years? Because we can't hold on to grudges. The intensity is what we normally think of when we think of anger. So on a 1 to 10 scale, how intense does it normally get when you get angry? 1 being calm, and then you got like a little bit annoyed, a little bit frustrated, and then you got anger in the middle at a 5, and then you've got incredible Hulk, fucking enraged at a 10, like just completely out of your mind. And so, you know, how intense do you get when you get angry? And the third one is frequency. How often are you getting angry or annoyed or irritated? Is it all the time? Is it several times a day? Is it once a week? And so one of the things that I'll teach clients is look at your anger on each of those 3 axes or spectrums. And if there's improvement on any one of those areas, that's improvement. Because I've had people come in and say, you know, it's not really working. There's nothing going on. You know, there's no progress. And so I'll go through those 3 with them, and they're like, well, duration's the same, intensity's the same, but yeah, I'm not getting angry as frequently. Okay, well, that's still progress. It's not, I mean, we'd like to see more, but that's still going in the right direction. So those are a couple of tools or frameworks that I teach people in the beginning.
Thank you, John. And you said something, a lot of things that are very important. One thing that jumped out at me is you talked about men paying attention. Women too. Women get angry too, but we work with men. That anger, paying attention to that trigger to get angry, or what's making you angry, because it represents a need. You know, they need something. What are some of the needs that are being masked or confused with anger?
You know, I think that whenever I get angry at this point in my life, the question that I ask myself now is, did someone just hurt my feelings? Or did my feelings just get hurt? Because anger is often talked about as a secondary emotion, which means that there's another emotion that underlies it. Now, consider that these emotions come really, really quickly. Like we're talking 1/3 of a second. So, you know, it could be that hurt is underlying that anger. It could be embarrassment. It could be anxiety. It could be guilt. And so one of the things that the biggest one for me though is, shit, someone just hurt my feelings, like that hurt me or that embarrassed me. But some of the other needs are, I mean, it could be hunger, it could be loneliness, it could be you need a hug, it could be someone's not speaking to you with respect, it could be someone's taking up too much of your time. I mean, there's all sorts of different needs. And I think one of the big challenges for men is to identify those needs, because one of the ways that we're socialized is to be invulnerable and self-reliant. Well, what does that mean? It means we're not supposed to have any needs. So as we're growing up, we don't practice speaking up for what we need. I grew up thinking I'm just supposed to deal with everything by myself. That's what being a man is. I don't need anyone. I don't ask for fucking help. And that's a real problem, because there are times in life when we do need help. Whether it's, you know, alcoholism or drug addiction or porn addiction or anger. I mean, there's all sorts of things that we could learn and make our lives better and more satisfying if we just reach out to mentors or people around us that have come before us.
Yeah, one of the best decisions I ever made in my life was extending a hand, you know, around 10 years ago at my low point, saying, I can't do this anymore. I need help. And you know what's interesting about that reaching out for help part? You know, a lot of my clients like you, very, very successful men, they know professionally when they're in a situation and they need help, They find the right expert. They find the right person. They lead the team. You know, an element of pride in getting the right people in the right seats on the right bus in order to move a mission forward. But when it comes to personal, they fail miserably because that's a sign of weakness, right?
Yeah, and I think that whole idea of weakness, or I'm supposed to handle this on my own, I'm supposed to be powerful, I'm supposed to have all the answers, I'm not supposed to ask for help, all those are wrapped up in this concept of masculinity, and they completely screw us as we become adults later on in life. Because what do we do? I mean, I can't tell you how many men I've talked to that don't have that many friends, feel like they're supposed to have the solution to every problem. And what they do is they end up working themselves to death, getting overwhelmed by stress, falling into really bad habits, porn, sex addiction, alcohol, drugs. And we get disconnected from the people that love us the most. And one of the solutions, or one of the pillars to a happy, satisfying, thriving life, is connection and relationship. And if we're cut off from, I mean, really from a really young age, there's research that shows that we're shutting down the use of emotional language by kindergarten. We are starting to get insults from peers about, don't be such a girl, at the age of 4 and 5. And so we associate anything that's feminine with the negative. And by the time we get to high school, we have two main priorities often. It's don't be seen as gay, don't be seen as feminine or female. And it's really easy to manipulate us. I mean, if you look at how easily manipulated you are by phrases like, stop being so gay, don't be a pussy, don't be a fag, don't be a bitch. And forgive me, I don't mean to insult anyone that's gay or transgender or bi, but those are the insults that we grew up with, and they're still out there. They've been around for at least 50 years. But we are so easily manipulated. I mean, I went to a punk rock festival a year ago with a couple of friends of mine from college. And I remember at the end of the night, there was mosh pits springing up around us. And I got a friend that, you know, goes to a lot of concerts and has for his whole life. And he was like, John, get in the mosh pit. I was like, no, I'm okay. Dude, get in the mosh pit. No, I'm cool. Pussy. And I just started laughing. I was like, you're kidding me. Like, I'm over 50 years old and I'm still getting this shit. Now, in the moment, I mean, I know the game at this point, so I can kind of laugh it off and just say, fuck you. But that's how prevalent it is.
It's just as you were telling me that story, I just had this like flashback, like a montage, John, of all the times in my life where someone was able to use a word like that. And again, just like Dr. John said, guys, this isn't in any way like saying that these words are good and they shouldn't be used to hurt somebody. But let's face it, what are the worst possible things? And when I was a child that I could be called was a girl or was a fag.
Yeah, and I speak about these insults freely at this point. And again, I don't mean to insult anyone or trigger anyone, but I also think that awareness is the next step, that the more of us can be aware of the game that's being played out there, the more of us can step out of the game and stop playing it. And I think that's the way to kind of lead to an evolution of men on a bigger scale.
Yeah, I agree, John. It you know, my journey, you know, anger, acting out, sex, drugs, just really unable to, you know, manage that part of me. And it was just an awakening, you know, seeing, you know, digging underneath the, you know, peeling away the layers of the onion and then see behind this mask of anger, which, look, I'm big, was really because I felt so small. And when I think about me, is, you know, the bigger my anger, the smaller my inner child or the exile was, using the internal family systems model. Is that what you see in your clients as well?
Yeah, I mean, I did a series on social media, I don't know, a month or two ago about all the masks that men wear, that I've worn, that you've worn, that we wear. You know, there's the mask of affluence, you know, so I can protect myself if I've got a Ferrari or a yacht or a huge house. There's the mask of sarcasm, the mask of intelligence, the mask of like physicality or physical power, mask of dominance. I mean, there's all these masks that we wear in order to protect ourselves on the inside. But the real question to me, the most compelling question is what's behind the mask? And what's behind all those masks that we're using to protect ourselves from being embarrassed and humiliated are things like fear, doubt, insecurity, hurt. I mean, they're all the more, I don't know, the more vulnerable emotions, the scarier emotions that we are afraid if we share those, we're going to be mocked and humiliated, because pretty much that's what happened to us when we were growing up.
Yeah. And so let's play this forward. Somebody out there listening now realizes, hearing you talk, John, that we've got this problem. They've got this problem. And well, first, really quick, John, how can people contact you? We've talked about a number of really cool topics. Where can people go and get more information?
A couple ways. So I've got one website is guidetoself.com. That's guidetoself.com. There's theevolvedcaveman.com. And on most of the social media, like Instagram and Facebook, you can find me under The Evolved Caveman. I think Twitter, I'm at John Shin, JOHNSCHIN.
Good. And I'm gonna list all of these for people in the blog description, on YouTube, anywhere I can put it, guys. I'm gonna give you an opportunity to connect with John. But let's fast forward. Somebody realizes they have an anger issue. It's impacting their lives in a negative way. It's masking other feelings that are preventing them from living a full and complete life. What can someone expect? What does their life look like when they've tamed this anger beast? How would this change people? Because I think sometimes, John, people think it's, well, I just won't be angry anymore, but they don't see the bigger picture. And I'm just hoping you can illuminate that bigger picture. If someone takes the brave step and begins to address these issues that are impacting their life so negatively.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. So thanks for asking it. I think that, at the end of the process, you've learned how to use anger to your advantage, as I mentioned earlier. So it's not that you don't get angry. You'll still get angry at times, but you'll be on top of it sooner. So you can speak to it more quickly, like, I'm a little bit annoyed, I'm a little bit frustrated. I mean, one of the things I tell every guy that's in a relationship is you need to downplay the intensity of your anger to your spouse. Because anytime we men come at it as, I'm pissed, I'm angry, the response to that typically from a female is, there's a degree of fear associated with it. And anytime there's fear associated in someone, they're shutting down and they're not able to hear you. So you always want to downplay the intensity of the emotion. I'm a little bit annoyed, I'm getting kind of frustrated, can we talk about this? But, the other thing that you'll get is you will become, I mentioned a third of a second. So we know from research that you have a third of a second between stimulus and response. So someone cuts you off on the freeway, you get pissed, you start yelling, you flip them the bird. There's not much time between the event and your emotion. With practice, you can actually lengthen that third of a second to a second, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, a minute, and so on. So now you can insert thought around that. Gee, is this really a matter of life and death? Do I really need to be that concerned about it? Maybe I put a different interpretation on it. Like, maybe the guy that's tailgating me in the fast lane on the freeway, maybe he needs to get to the emergency room and he's got a sick kid in the back seat. Something like that. The other part of it is that one of the, I think, revolutionary approaches that I have to anger management is in my online anger management course that's at Guide to Self. I don't just go at it from an anger management perspective. I've combined anger management with positive psychology. So traditional anger management's about an education about anger. It's, what are the universal anger triggers so that you're aware of those? It's, what does anger do? How does anger make you react? How do you recognize anger in your body? Then there's these stress reduction techniques, which are really pretty pleasant. It's sort of, how do you relax? How do you turn on that parasympathetic nervous system, the relaxation response, so that you can chill out? And then the other part of it is, I don't believe that you can just take away anger or minimize anger without putting something in its place, because nature abhors a vacuum. So in my mind, you want to put more positive thoughts and positive emotions into you to take the place where that anger once was. And so, you talked about the end result. The end result is really a happier, more satisfying, more connected life where you can actually connect in an authentic and meaningful way to the people who love you, rather than pushing them away with your anger, annoyance, irritation, and hostility.
A fulfilled, connected, loving, powerful, purpose-driven life, brothers. That is the solution if you're willing to do the work. Well, John, thank you so much for being here. I look forward to having you back. And, you guys who are listening, how selective I am in making sure I'm only bringing you the best. I love Dr. John. I love his Evolved Caveman podcast. I strongly encourage you to check it out. Visit guidetoself.com, the Evolved Caveman.com, and I'm going to post all his social media links when I release this podcast, so you guys are going to have access. John, thank you so much for being here, brother. Really, really appreciate your time today.
Craig, my pleasure. I really enjoy the conversations. We've had one on my podcast, one on yours. I'd be happy to do more because I really love talking to you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I feel as we continue to do this, we'll find our groove because we have so much in common, and I think what we're doing is special. Men need help, and they need different perspectives because the traditional isn't serving anybody. And you talked about how you're helping guys with anger and helping them take it deeper versus traditional anger management. And it's so much more than not doing something. And that reminds me of the traditional addiction model as well, brothers, and a really intensive focus on not doing something. And as Dr. John has told us, nature abhors a vacuum. Thank you, brothers, for listening. Embrace your power of choice. Feed the right wolf inside you. And please contact Dr. John. Reach out to me if you're struggling. Life is too short to suck.